So thank you everyone for joining us at the September online talk for the CSG members. It is excellent to see so many of you turning out, and I'm very excited that we will be hearing from Kate McCabe today, talking about castles in Scotland, a absolutely fascinating topic with some very interesting sites to look at. And if you are interested in more about Scottish history, Kate does run the Scotty Chronicast podcast. I've listened to a few episodes. I'm a bit behind on my listening, but it is a very good listen. So by all means, do check that out. And on that subject, I think it's time to hand over to Kate. So Kate, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for having me here today. I am excited to talk about some of my research. It's been a little while. And hopefully my computer won't be too slow, but eventually it'll get there. But yeah, as some of you might recognize or know me previously as Kate Buchanan. I have married, and technically my name is now Kate McCabe. I still haven't decided what to do with names, so you'll see me as both Kate Buchanan and Kate McCabe, just for maximum confusion. I still, everything that is sort of published and official is under Buchanan at this point, but that is just a little explanation there. So most of what I have been working on centers around a shire in Scotland that is currently called Angus. It used to be called Forfarshire, and it is around Dundee, if you know a little bit more about the Scottish geography. It's Dundee, and then sort of north up the coast a ways there. So yeah, we're going to be focusing on Angus. It is a small study, so we'll keep that in mind as we're discussing these themes. But one of the things that has always interested me are looking at castles as places of social centers, and what that sort of look like. So we today are going to talk a little bit about my thoughts on this. So I know for many historians, this is not going to come as a surprise, but I am often surprised that some of my recent conversations with just some people have revealed that oftentimes there's a misunderstanding that people in medieval society or early modern society didn't move around much, that they were pretty much stationary in their one place and somehow managed to stay in their small town in Scotland and not visit a town that was 3 miles away ever. And I know that this is a gross misunderstanding, an oversimplification of what society is, and especially when we're talking about noble society, that it moved around a lot. I know I'm a little bit preaching to the choir here, but society was mobile, and so there were different places within medieval Scottish noble society that would become sort of hubs, central points, where people would often interact. And there are lots of reasons for moving around, lots of different sort of drivers for this sort of mobility. Some of it might have been business, Some of it might have been politics, pleasure, family, religion, all of that works together to form this sort of mobile society. I've always loved this picture from Duke de Berry that sort of shows a little social gathering sort of within the setting and the context of a castle. And although this is a castle, it is much grander than anything we are going to be talking about today. It is one of my favorites, and I thought a good representation here. So what I have done is sort of created a database of sort of the social network points within Angus in Scotland, sort of late medieval and early modern time period. So I used a lot of different points to measure sort of contact. Some of that happens with charters and interactions, people with sort of witness lists, and then there's also marriages and other points within Angus. And I'll point that out as important later on, because it is a relatively small study. And within this, I looked at the respective corresponding noble residences. And within that database, there came out 5 particular residences that were connected to the most people, had the most interaction points. And so in this study, we're looking at them as the sort of hubs, the social centers in Angus for this time period. Now, some of them are a little bit surprising, and some of them are not. There were 2 sort of tied for top place, and that's Airlie and Dudhope. And then there were 3 sort of tied for second place. We have Baikie, Auchterhouse, and Fithie. I put glams on this map just for a point of reference, because I couldn't quite manage to get it to show up otherwise. And what I'm wanting to sort of discuss here is not only do we have this sort of interesting set of sites, because they're not really ones that you would initially think of if you knew of the area, what might be the main castles or the main social centers in Angus. But I also wanted to look at, what do these sites look like? And so what does that tell us about sort of the social expectation of the built environment in which a lot of these interactions are taking place? Yeah, we have in orange, Airlie and Dudhope, and then the blue points here are the next 3 on there. We're going to talk a little bit about the sites and what we know of them. Starting off with what might be my favorite site, which is Airlie, favorite within this study, which is Airlie Castle. And Airlie was originally built around 1432, and it's suggested that it was built as an oblong quadrangle, and it has this beautiful sort of portcullis gateway in the east wall. And this particular site was burned down in 1640 And then maybe in the late 18th century, they decided to build up what is the current mansion, which is sort of behind this wall here from this picture. Anything that survives physically from the castle, the earlier castle's structure, is within this eastern wall here. And this structure was part of the Ogilvy family's sites. So the Ogilvys, we have an Ogilvy who was the Lord High Treasurer of Scotland, and then we have them as hereditary sheriffs of Angus. Unfortunately, not much more of the physical site remains, but if you look at the image here that is on Timothy Pont's drawing, this is Pont 29, you can see he's got 3 towers here. These little dots are representing floors, and then what is the little archway showing the gate here. So we get a little bit of a sense of Timothy Pont. If you don't know who Timothy Pont was a well, he drew a bunch of maps of Scotland, sort of late 16th century, 1580s through to the early 1600s. And a lot of his drawings sort of at least roughly resemble what things were looking like. There's a lot of coding that he did, so some of it's a little bit perhaps not as representative of what was exactly there, but has a implication there that we will get into a little bit later. But it's often the earliest sort of map depictions that we have of a lot of places in Scotland, and we're very lucky that there are a couple of maps that actually cover Angus, considering that a lot of these structures don't have a lot of physical remains left. This is what is a very helpful piece of evidence. So we'll move on to Dudhope Castle, which has at least 3 known phases of building to it. So the original structure was probably built around, maybe earlier than 1298, but it was certainly around in 1298. And then there was a new build that was done on the site in 1460. And then again, it was completely renovated in 1600 to this beautiful looking building here that we have. The original structure might have been an oblong tower with some wings that sort of shaped it into an L plan. And it was also later on enclosed into a courtyard. Excuse me. But we don't, again, have a whole lot of evidence of the earliest structure, and anything that was of the sort of 15th century build has been either removed or reincorporated to the point where we are not easily able to identify where it is within this structure as it sits today. The building itself was had the benefit of having the long being in the ownership of the constables of Dundee, the Scrimgeour family, for a very long time. So it's perhaps rare in Scotland for a building to stay within one family's possession for such a long period of time. And I think that is a cool thing about the site. And we look on Pont's drawing of it, and it is here. Again, you can kind of see the little gate and multi-stories, several towers there. So it gives us a little bit of an idea of what the place looked like around, or what this 15th century structure might have been before this renovation in 1600. Now, I say this because Timothy Pont, although his earlier drawings were in the 1580s, he did draw some things after 1600. But Charles McKean, when his study of the sort of different buildings and how they have been ranked, and how he has identified a sort of ranking system that Pont was showing in his structures, he talks about, with lots of comparisons, that the Angus maps are actually some of the earlier maps, so are more likely to be representative of what sort of 1580s looked like, than closer to 1600, which is, again, very helpful for me. We will move on to Baikie Castle. We're moving on to castles that have suffered misfortune of time. And Baikie was originally built before 1438 sometime, not entirely sure when. And it is suggested that it might have been two buildings sort of joined together in an L type plan, with some turrets and some fortified walls. It was unfortunately gone by the 18th century, so we don't know a whole lot about what the physical remains were, and sort of the site has been, well, any remains of the site have been sort of taken away via the farming and the supposed rehabilitation of this land, which used to be a lake. But this was a seat of a barony of Baikie, and it, in the documents at least, is described as being a fortalice, and also a mansion. And we have two depictions of it from Pont. We have this one, which might be an earlier depiction, Pont 26. And then we have Pont 29, both of them showing it sort of being in the lake, and in Pont 29 has a little bit more of a detailed structure than it does in Pont 26. And the next site is Auchterhouse, which was actually a very prominent structure in its time. Again, it was built sometime before 1438. We're not entirely sure when it starts appearing regularly in the documents that I found around 1438 as a castle and a fortalice. And there is very little else known about what the actual structure was, but we do see it in Pont 26, so it's there. We don't really know much more about the history of the site. Presumably, like Baikie, it was gone before the 18th century, and so we don't really have a lot more to go on it, which is interesting, and that these places that were sort of well or regularly visited during the 15th and 16th centuries are no longer present in itself. But at least we have this pont picture, because the next site in Fithie, we really don't have anything. I know that it was built before 1539. It starts showing up regularly in documents. Again, it is a seat of the barony, and it is talked about as a fortalice and a manor house. It is likely to be smaller than the others, and it's much further north than the other sites, but other than that, we don't have a lot to say about it. So we're going to kind of not say any more about it from this point onwards. So we're going to narrow it down to the 4 sites that we at least have pictures from Timothy Pont. So that's Dudhope, and Baikie and Airlie at Auchterhouse. Now, as I was looking at these sites and really trying to answer the question of what did these sites look like, these sites that were the social hubs within this area of Scotland, within Angus, I started to notice that all of these sites within Timothy Pont's depictions of them are incredibly similar. So they all have these sort of 3 towers with a little gatehouse. We have Dudhope here has the tallest tower with sort of 4 stories above the gatehouse, and then the rest of them are probably 3 stories. It's a little bit hard to tell if the smudges are actually meant to indicate a window or if they are just a smudge. But at least 2 stories above the gatehouse, 3 stories, or clearly 3 stories in some of them. And I found this really interesting, partially because I spend far too much time looking at the maps from Timothy Pont. And although there are sort of regular themes, and Charles McKean has been great, or was great with his sort of categorization of buildings, there is, within those categories, there's still some leeway for finding some interesting material, or finding sort of subcategories, perhaps. So these would sort of fall under what he would categorize as either category 3 or 4, but they're so similar that I cannot not think that there's sort of a subcategory here, that Pont is showing us what these structures would have been like. And not all of the castles that he draws have a nice sort of gateway entrance. But these all seem to have an indication of a nice gateway entrance, which is a great flavor when you're talking about people coming and going, what they're going to see very initially, what their experience of entering the property is going to include this this gate entrance. You also have multiple towers. Again, that's going to contribute to the aesthetics of the entrance to the place, and how everything functions inside. And I wish that I could tell you how everything functioned inside, because that would be amazing to know for all of these sites. But sadly, I have been working on a part of Scotland where there were so many castles. It was an incredibly rich area, or rich in castellated structures, but so little of it survives today. And I I have thoughts on how to move forward, which involve a lot more sort of looking at Timothy Pont, and it would be lovely, although I haven't found any yet. Would be great to find other sort of structures within Timothy Pont that look, like this, with this similar sort of design, and then have a matching pair of a castle that actually has some physical remains to it. And then maybe we could have some further discussions of what this symbology might be portraying within Pont. But that will have to come in the future. And I would be very open to any suggestions that you might have for sites to look at, and very open to questions. I realize that kind of ran through that, so if you have any questions or want me to expand on things, please feel free. Thank you.